Welcome. This yin sequence will include postures such as heart opening on a block, Ragdoll Pose, low flying dragon pose, half butterfly pose with eagle arms, and finally Milky Way Pose. Due to the nature of many of these postures, some sort of firm supportive prop to generate height is going to be needed. Typically that's a yoga block or a yoga brick. So one or two of those will be needed. Now, if you don't have yoga blocks, you can substitute books or some other kind of firm prop. You can even get away with a bolster or a stack of blankets here. The story during class will be one about a scientific one that's about an astronomical object known as a brown dwarf. This practice starts with a comfortable seat. So find something that's stable. Again, I'm sitting cross-legged, and if sitting cross-legged is fine with you, that's okay. If sitting cross-legged is painful, then find a different seat. Wiggle around, root down, find your center. Go up tall through your torso. Head, neck, face slightly, it's kind of just softening here. Shoulders softening and melting back. And we'll start off with some movement here. So I call this cry third eye opening here. So take your left hand, place your left hand over your heart. Maybe spend some time here and maybe you can actually feel your heartbeat. Take your right hand and gently place it over your left hand here. Maybe feel this for a breath or two. And then slowly begin to move your hands away from your heart and then up towards that space in between your eyes. So fingers can slightly overlap, or the big middle finger can touch. As they touch that space in between your eyes, this is known as your third eye. And then move your hands forward and up, expand them out, and then round them, extend your arms out and down to about shoulder height, and then bring them back to cover your heart again. So left hand over right here. And then you can move with your breath here. You can create a vinyasa. So as you inhale and move your hands over, flip them over and touch your third eye. And then as you expand, change to an exhale. Exhale and return your hands to your heart. Let me do this a couple more times. You might have to go faster or slower than I go. So inhale to your third eye. Exhale and expand, swoop your arms all the way back to your heart space. And we'll do one more cycle here. So inhale to your third eye and above, and then exhale back to your heart center. And maybe just stay here for a breath or two. Again, see if you can feel the rise and fall of your torso as you breathe, and maybe even feel your heartbeat here to get in touch with the present moment, to get in touch with an anchor here. And then once you've done that, we'll do a couple of yang exercises, a few balancing postures. So the first one starts out on hands and knees. This is kind of a balancing half moon pose on the knees. By the way, whenever you come to hands and knees, if this is really like torturous on your knees, then you always give yourself the permission to create extra padding underneath the knees. So grab one of your blankets, and you can always start this exercise with some extra padding underneath the knees, if that helps a lot here. So from a standard tabletop position, from standard hands and knees, take your right shin and move your right shin out to the right few inches. So noticing I'm just rotating that shin, and then I'm rooting through that foot here. Root through your right hand, and then rotate your torso to the left. Extend the left leg out and set the left foot down until you're rooting through the left foot. So the left leg is straight here. And then just left hand can stay at your waist here. Just see how this feels. You can try the balance here if you're rooted through that hand and through this right foot. Lift the left leg up. This is kind of the next step. See if that feels okay. If it's too wobbly, put the left foot back down. If it's okay for that left foot to be straight compared to the torso, maybe the next thing to try is to raise the right arm up towards the ceiling with a little bit of energy here. And if you're still trying to challenge yourself and your balance, your gaze can go sideways, maybe even up towards the ceiling here. And then gaze goes down, left foot comes down, arm comes down, come back to table pose. And then we'll do the other side. So kind of shake that out here. Whatever you did, as long as you didn't hurt yourself, that was okay here. Left shin goes out to the side. Left hand roots. And now extend the right leg back. Turn your torso to the right so it's stacked here. Plant that right foot in the ground. Right leg is straight and strong here. Maybe just stay here. Or if you feel like the balance here, maybe start lifting that right leg up off of the ground. Maybe bring the right arm up here. And if you want to challenge your balance the most, maybe gaze up towards the ceiling. And then gaze goes down, leg comes down. Bring your arm down, go back to table. And a few breaths here. We'll try gate pose next. So gate pose starts from kneeling, but we can start from tabletop here, and we can still use the padding underneath the knees here. So we'll end up kneeling, but maybe we start out on tabletop. From here, extend the left leg out to the side. Left foot's rooting through the ground here. Hands can still be on the ground, and then slowly work yourself up to a kneeling position. So this is kneeling gate pose here. Arms come up. You lengthen out here, and then slowly laterally bend over the extended leg here. So we're laterally bending over to the left. The left arm can just rest on the left leg. Reach up and over with the right arm as far as you go here. Again, these are kind of yang poses, so muscles are toning here. Remember to breathe. Bring both hands back up. Hands come down. You can bring hands all the way down to the ground here. And then bring the left leg in. Bring the right leg out. So the other side. So you're rooting through the whole bottom of that right foot for stability. When you feel ready, you work your torso up to a kneeling position. Arms come up. Lengthen here to bend. And then gently bend over to the right side. Stay here for 1 or 2 breaths to kind of feel this pose. And then inhale, bring yourself all the way back up. Hands come down, torso comes down, so you can easily bring this right leg back in. And then from here, that was the warm-up. So we'll move into the first long held yin posture, which I don't have a special name for other than heart opening on a block here. So this is where we'll need some blocks here. Take a block. You'll need 2 for this, so maybe 2 stacks of books if you don't have blocks. First block goes at one end of your yoga mat, if you have a yoga mat. The other block is about a foot in front of it here. So we're going to lay back with our upper back on this block. I've got the blocks on the middle setting, but you can adjust them to the low setting or to the high setting here. So I'll take the blanket out of the way. And then come to lying on your back, legs extended out in front. And then take the first block and maneuver it so it's crossways across the center of your upper back. So not your lumbar, that's too low, and not your neck, that's too high, but somewhere kind of right below your shoulder blades. And then the second block is the support block for your head and your neck, just to keep it stable here. And then arms can just droop on either side. And the idea here is this is a yin posture, so we're trying to relax, soften everything, and just kind of ooze down the sides of the blocks here. And this is probably not the most comfortable position, but the idea is to soften, to breathe, and to just stay here if this is not painful. You might have to decide that you have to lower or raise the blocks, or maybe for some reason this is just too painful. So we'll try to stay here for about 3 minutes. But if this posture is not working for you, there's a couple of options you can try. Maybe the blocks or the books are just too hard and edgy and painful. So you can do this whole exercise with a blanket roll. So you can make a blanket roll. I've got one here made up already. And you can just put the blanket roll crosswise underneath your shoulder blades. Still creates pressure in your upper spine, but maybe it's a little bit softer and easy to deal with. So that's an option. Or if you're trying to increase the sensations in your shoulders, you can opt for Melting Heart Pose. And you can use the blocks if you have them for Melting Heart, in which case you come to hands and knees, you come to table pose. And then blocks are spaced about shoulder width apart. And then you just place your elbows on the blocks. And then lower your head and neck through the blocks as you melt your upper body, your back, your torso down in between the blocks. Legs, hips are stable, so you might have to adjust where your legs are to make sure everything is feeling stable here. You get a lot more pressure in the shoulders with Melting Heart. But it's also an upper back bend here. So we're about halfway through if you're residing in heart opening on a block and you're wondering how much more time you want to spend here. About a minute left or so. So whatever variation you pick here, settle yourself back and notice. Give yourself permission to come out if you need to. Give yourself permission to stay. Adjust this posture for your own unique body. This is all part of finding your edge, which is the first of the 3 parts of this practice. Second part is finding the will to stay, the fortitude, the patience. And the third is spending some time here. So that said, we have about 5 gentle breaths here, in whatever variation you chose. Maybe you're here on blocks, maybe you're on books, maybe you're trying Melting Heart because you suppose that you enjoy here. Get in touch with your breath and notice. So yoga, boiled down to a minimum, is really about paying attention and noticing what's going on in your internal landscape as you make these different shapes, as you reside in these different postures. See how your body is responding to them. So heart opening, this posture, maybe you feel a lot or maybe you don't feel very much. Oftentimes we feel a lot when we come out of a posture like this, and we're about ready to come out. So if you're ready to come out of this posture, deal with your head and your neck first. Take your hands, reach back, cup your hands behind your head and stabilize your neck here, since we've been here for a while. Once you've done that, you can figure out how to get out of your posture, whatever means you need to. The rest of the way, maybe you need to roll to one side, or maybe you can sit up, and then notice the reverberation if there is any. Again, this is the art, some might say science, of paying attention. It's actually what science is just paying attention and making an objective observation of how you're feeling when you come out of the posture here. From here, if you need to do a little bit of wiggling around, maybe some twists to work out the achiness of that back bend, we're going to move into a forward bend known as Ragdoll Pose. And there'll be some other alternatives. Ragdoll isn't for everyone. Well, Ragdoll, we need to come to standing. So you'll come to standing, nice stable stance. So maybe feet need to be fairly wide. Maybe they hip width or even shoulder width. Toes can turn in, they can turn out. In other words, play around, find a stable stance because you'll be here for a while. And then Ragdoll is simply as it sounds. You fold your torso forward as far as it goes until it stops. Knees can be soft. Maybe you're someone who can have your legs straight, and that's fine if they're straight. They don't have to be straight. They can be as deeply bent as they need to be. And then you just fold forward, relax, round your spine, let everything release in your upper body. And maybe this is too disconcerting. So if you have blocks, you can take a block and you can put your hand on a block just to kind of stabilize yourself while you're here. So this might look like this here. So this is Ragdoll here. Another thing you can do with Ragdoll, you can clasp your hands too. If you want to take the balance out of the equation, you can do Ragdoll at the wall. So you can back up maybe a few inches in front of the wall just to make space for your glutes if they push back when you bend your knees. And then you bend over, come into Ragdoll, and then shift your weight back so that you're leaning against the wall. That way you won't feel so much like you're toppling over. So these are all different versions of Ragdoll. For some of us, this is just too much for our blood pressure. So what you can do is you can do caterpillar. Again, these are just different forms of forward folds. Caterpillar is legs extended, not necessarily straight unless they straighten for you. And then you just fold forward here. So all different kinds of variations that you can do for Ragdoll. Otherwise, we'll try to stay here for a couple of minutes, for a couple more minutes here. And since this is yin, by the way, you can wiggle around here a little bit to kind of release tension. You can nod your head yes, shake your head no. You can sway yourself side to side. When you get kind of all the tension worked out, the idea is to bring yourself to stillness here. And then just stay here. Like I said, we'll try to stay here for 3 minutes, but you're paying attention to what your body wants and what it needs, and it might have to come out sooner. Maybe it wants to stay longer. And again, since this is a YouTube video, so you can just pause it or ignore it if you're just really, really enjoying a posture here. So a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I used to work in the field of astronomy. This is why, this should be no surprise why many of these yoga practices have astronomy themes. Obviously, I used to work in the field, and I used to work at an astronomical observatory that specialized in observing astronomical objects in radio light rather than visible. So there's light can take many forms, many wavelengths, many different kinds of energies, and the light we see with our eyes is called visible light. The radio light is just a different type of light. We can't see it with our eyes, but it's a light of lower energy, longer wavelengths, and we can detect it with a radio detector. And it often takes the form of what looks like a giant radio dish here. So we have about 3 or 4 more breaths here in Ragdoll. Maybe you're wanting to come out so you can. Otherwise, let's take it out. A couple more breaths here. See if you can refine your breath and re-release, re-relax here. One final time. When you're ready to come out of Ragdoll Pose, then if you're standing kind of free form, the way I'm doing right now, and you want an easy way out, then keep bending your knees, reach down, put your hands on the floor, and then slowly bring yourself onto hands and knees. Maybe you need the padding again underneath your knees. we'll do a few cat and cows to work out the stagnation. Since that was a forward bend, let's start with cow. Cow is a back bend, so belly sinks, spine arches here in cow pose. Maybe stay here for a moment, and then when you're ready, slowly press yourself up into a gentle cat here. And then you can, if you feel like it, you can cycle. This is just a nice counter exercise. So these don't have to be the biggest, baddest cat and cows you've ever done before. This is just to help you to notice how this is feeling, and notice if this is in line with your expectations, your theory of what your body should feel like, as to pose what it actually is feeling like. So yoga is about getting in touch with what your body actually does feel like, rather than what we think it should feel like here. From here, we're moving into a hip opener. This hip opener is known as dragon pose, and I will suggest the low-flying version of this dragon pose. This pose is often called lizard pose. Lizard pose is the more common name for it. So from table pose, bring your left foot up in between your hands. Inch the right knee back, and again, give yourself permission to put as much padding underneath that back leg as you need. This is dragon, and you can give yourself permission to stay here. Or if you want to try low flying dragon, take the left foot, move it up to the left a few inches. Sweep the left arm on the inside of that leg. And then see if you can begin to lower yourself down a little bit. Maybe you can make it down onto forearms. If you can't quite make it and you have the blocks, then you can use the blocks to move the floor up here. So this is a handy little adjustment here. Maybe you don't like dragon or low flying dragon, too painful. Then you can come out of low flying dragon and make your way to a half happy baby pose. So make your way onto your back. Left knee comes in, can give the left knee a hug, can stay here, or you can raise the bottom of the left foot to point up towards the ceiling, grab the shin, ankle, or foot, and allow the left knee to ooze down towards the ground here. So this is a good alternative if dragon is not fitting your body here. Otherwise, we'll come back to low flying dragon, and we'll stay here for a couple more minutes. Get in touch with what your body is experiencing here. Get in touch with your breath. So I'd like to talk about this astronomical object. It's one of the zoo of astronomical, astrophysical objects that we encounter in the universe. And it's an object known as a brown dwarf. Now, a brown dwarf is basically something that collapsed out of a primordial cloud of gas and dust, and just like stars do. So its formation is very similar to stellar formation, star formation. But the difference is brown dwarfs are so small. They're much smaller in mass than stars are. And because of that, they don't have the gravitational power to create the heat and pressure needed to start thermonuclear fusion at its cores. And so therefore it doesn't shine like stars do. You can think of a brown dwarf as an object that's much smaller than a star, but much bigger than a gas planet like Jupiter. So the most common metaphor you can have in your mind is, okay, this thing is somewhat bigger than Jupiter, but way smaller than the sun. In fact, typical brown dwarfs have somewhere between 30 to 200 times the mass of Jupiter, but they don't have enough mass to be a star. Now,
Most brown dwarfs are not much bigger than Jupiter in size. They're maybe 1.5 times the diameter of Jupiter. So if you saw a brown dwarf, it would sort of resemble Jupiter, even though it'd be much more massive than Jupiter is. That's why brown dwarfs are not classified as planets. They have their own classification because they're not stars. They don't have thermonuclear fusion going on. For you technical nerds out there, yes, they are big enough to have a short time of deuterium burning in the center of their cores, but that's not the same as full hydrogen burning that's going on in the centers of real stars here. That's why they're classified as brown dwarfs, because they're also not very bright. It's only their internal heat that's creating any radiation that comes off of them here. They have other characteristics too, characteristics I'll get in later when I get into later when I start telling this story of science kind of correcting the path of an erroneous trail in the scientific world here. So we're kind of done with this side of dragon or low-flying dragon or inverted dragon. So slowly bring yourself up. Maybe come back to dragon first. And then a nice counter pose for this is to just simply shift your hips back, kind of walk your hands back. Shift your hips back over the back heel and extend the front leg as much as you can. The front foot is flexed here. If this is enough intensity, maybe stay here and feel that here. If you need a little bit more intensity, reach over with your right hand, grab the outside of that left leg, and just kind of pull your torso over and down. And just notice where it increases the sensation here. This is a yang counter pose, so you just stay here for a couple of breaths, and then at some point release. Make your way the rest of the way out of this posture. Maybe there's some more wiggling to do to work out the kinks. We do have the other side of that version of dragon. So pick your version. Regular dragon, low flying dragon. This time it's the right leg, right foot that's in front. Left leg is back here. Maybe it's inverted dragon, which is half happy baby pose. And then begin to settle. Settle down on this side here. So where I worked at this radio astronomy telescope, there was an incident that happened, long time ago. Again, this was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away as I started this class. Or started this practice here. In this case, it was at a time when brown dwarfs were really being studied. They're relatively kind of a new idea because they're hard to detect, and they had just been detected. We just had built the technology good enough to actually detect these very, very small, very, very cool, very, very dark kind of objects, because they're not bright like stars are, and yet we kind of knew that they would probably be there, and we finally science actually detected them, and now they were trying to determine what are the characteristics of these brown dwarfs. So it was great interest in the scientific community to try to figure out, okay, what are they made of? How do they shine, if they shine at all? What kind of properties do they have? And one of the research astronomers that worked where I worked at the radio telescope, he was in charge of a group of undergraduate summer students. So these were just college undergraduates who were there at the observatory for a summer to kind of learn the ropes of how to reduce data, how the telescope works, just the general life of a radio astronomer. And one of the things that they get is they get an hour of time on the radio telescope, which is a big gift because the radio telescope, it takes a lot of resources to run it. And it's trying to do cutting edge science. So on the one hand, it's a really nice thing to get some time on the radio telescope. Unfortunately, in order to do real science, you need a lot of time. You need tens to hundreds of hours of observing to get down to a sensitivity where you actually start seeing something new that you can actually write about and announce in a scientific publication. And usually an hour is not enough time to actually do real science on this radio telescope, but it is enough time to kind of get your feet wet, so to speak, and to kind of learn, get some real time on a telescope, kind of learn how to plan an observation and reduce the data. This is all really good experience for these young undergraduates who are trying to get into the field here. Most of the time, you can't do anything that's actually publishable or real science. So that 1 hour is often just wasted looking at a planet or at a quasar or maybe a galaxy, and then they can reduce the data. They can get some data that's real, but since somebody else has probably already observed that galaxy, it's like it's not something that's original. And so usually that hour is sort of quote unquote wasted for the good of the learning of the students. We need to come out of this side of dragon pose. So slowly make your way up. You can make your way all the way out, or you can do this sort of, I call this half monkey pose, this counter pose here, where you lean over the back heel with your hips and the front leg is straightened here. And again, this might be enough. Or maybe you want to reach around with that left hand and kind of pull your torso over that right leg, and just notice how it changes the experience here. Maybe one more breath here, and then slowly make yourself the rest of the way out of the posture here. Any other kind of movement or wiggling you need to do that, and then we'll set up for the next posture. So the next posture is half butterfly. And maybe you want to sit up on a little bit of padding for this posture. We'll start out sitting with legs out in front. And then from here, bend the left knee, lower the left knee out to the left. Bring in the left heel as far as it goes until it stops. So do this slowly. Some of us, maybe the heel makes it all the way to the hips. For some of us, it may be not. If the knee's floating and needs padding or support, put padding or support underneath that knee. Right leg goes out to the right a few inches. It stays extended, but the knee can be soft here. Half butterfly is this hip opening with a forward fold. Now you can just do the forward fold if you want to. Arms can just be out front. If you want a little bit of shoulder work, you can include your version of eagle arms, which makes this posture a little bit more challenging. To make eagle arms, extend your arms out to either side. Right arm reaches underneath the left arm, cross above the elbows. Bend at the elbows, and then hands either come to your shoulders. Maybe you can find your hook your fingers, or you can maybe make the prayer hands here. Doesn't really matter what it looks like, so you're finding your version here. Maybe grow up tall initially, hinge forward, and then release your torso, let it round until you find your stopping point. If you don't like hanging in midair, and you've got the eagle arms, maybe you can use a prop. Since I'm kind of saying we need blocks for this practice, if you have the blocks handy, you can use a block to rest your torso on. Otherwise, we'll stay here for a few more minutes. And again, we can just float here. Maybe you don't like the eagle arms, so undo the eagle arms. Just do half butterfly without the eagle arms here. Notice I'm kind of going in between my legs here. So you can fold over the right leg if you want to, or you can fold on either side of it. I'm folding on the side of my right leg so that my eagle arms can kind of like keep drifting towards the floor here. So the research scientist that was in charge of these undergraduates, he was trying to come up with something creative for them to observe that would be useful for them, would serve some purpose. And in science, there's what's known as a null experiment. Null experiments are not very fashionable. Don't get a lot of money or prestige for doing null. What a null experiment is to prove some. If there's a theory that says something is not supposed to happen or doesn't exist, you can create a null experiment that proves, that actually observes something not doing something or something not existing. Not a lot of people don't spend much time on this because they're really important to science, but they're often not publishable because we want to focus on the stuff we do observe happening or do observe existing. That's why null experiment is still really useful. And he was thinking about this because he was thinking about brown dwarfs. And one of the characteristics that theorists had theorized about brown dwarfs is that they don't emit any radio waves, or at least not any that are detectable. And so he went back and he said, well, let's see if there's been any observations. And sure enough, there have been absolutely no observations of brown dwarfs searching for radio light emission from brown dwarfs. And he thought, well, that's odd. And then he noticed something. No one had bothered to do any observations of a brown dwarf from the radio. And all the theorists were basing their theory off of observations. Since there were no observations of brown dwarfs emitting radio waves, the theorists basically worked into their theory that brown dwarfs don't emit radio waves. And this was starting to concern this research scientist. He's like, wait a second. You're basically basing your theory off of the fact that nobody's actually tried to observe a brown dwarf in the radio. And that's when he got the idea for this null experiment for the college kids there. He said, okay, maybe what we should do is observe a brown dwarf in the radio. We'd be the first people to do it. And we can confirm that the theorists are right. We can, if we don't see anything, we point the telescope at a brown dwarf in the radio, get nothing. That's a valuable contribution to science. Maybe we can't publish it, but we can at least say, hey, we tried looking at a brown dwarf in the radio and sure enough, nothing there. And so that confirms the theory here. We can come out of this. Release the eagle arms first. Maybe put the hands on the ground to use your hands and your arms to bring your torso back up and straight. Maybe the torso is really achy, so maybe there's a few twists or back bends that you need to do. Maybe you're done with the half butterfly legs, so they come forward. And point and flex your feet a few times. We'll get set up for the other side of half butterfly. So right knee bends, right knee goes out to the side. Bring the right heel in until it stops. Maybe the right knee needs a prop here for support. Left leg goes out to the left a few inches. It's still extended. Leg can be straight or knee can be soft. In fact, you can put something underneath that knee here. Now it's the left arm underneath the right for your version of eagle arms, whatever that is for you here. And then fold forward and soften here for another couple of minutes on this side. So this astronomer explained it to the college interns. He said, okay, he says, I figured out a project for you to do. We're going to do a null experiment. We're going to observe a brown dwarf in the radio just because no one has ever done it. Now the theorists say you shouldn't see anything because brown dwarfs don't emit radio waves. So we're just going to confirm that. And it'll be a good exercise. You'll learn how to use the telescopes and make an observing program and reduce the data and all these little technical details that you're here trying to learn how to do. So that's what they did. They put together an observing program. They picked a brown dwarf to look at, one of these objects that's too small to be a star, but too big to be a planet, too big to be Jupiter here. And they pointed the radio telescopes at them. And they recorded the data, they took the data back to the computers, they reduced the data to see if they had any detection of radio light within the sensitivity of an hour's time on this big radio telescope. And lo and behold, there was a signal. Brown dwarfs emit radio light. The significance of this was profound, because not only was this the first time this had ever been observed and therefore publishable science, but it actually proved all the theories about brown dwarfs to be wrong. And this was done by a bunch of college kids just taking a summer school. So they got their results published in the most prestigious and famous science article of all, and that's Nature, publication of Nature. All of these kids, because they had done something no professional astronomer, no theorist ever thought of doing. They got lucky. And it all came down to the fact that nobody else had bothered to actually make the observation. We've got a few more breaths here. There's a tie-in here with yoga, by the way. Have we bothered to make the observation of what we're actually feeling in the postures? Sometimes the answer is no. And when we do make the observation, it blows our egoic theory about who we are out of the water. Just like these kids did with the detection of radio light in a brown dwarf. We can start to come out of this half butterfly pose. So again, maybe release the eagle arms first if you did the eagle arms. Press yourself all the way up to seated. Grow long through your torso, maybe a few twists or back bends, and then slowly bring that right knee up, extend the right leg forward, point and flex the toes a few times. Any other little movements that you need. The last long held in posture is what I call Milky Way Pose. It's a supported bridge pose that will need the blocks or the books again. There'll be alternatives here for this one too. So you can slowly make your way onto your back. Grab one or two blocks, however many you have, or books. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, and then lift your hips up high enough to put the blocks. I've got the blocks on the medium setting. They can be on the low setting or the high setting, but to demonstrate, I'll just use the medium setting. I've got two blocks here, and I'm placing them under my low back, my sacrum, the back of my pelvic bone, because that's the most stable place for them. That's the reason why I'm putting them there, is they feel the most comfortable and the most stable there. If you only have one block, then you just have to maneuver that block till it feels the most stable. The next step to Milky Way pose is experiment with extending one leg out and the other leg out. If this is too painful, I would maybe recommend using a lower height for this posture here. But for some people, I've discovered that this position is actually just too painful in the low back, no matter what the height is. So this is the pose if you found your height and you're kind of in a good spot to stay for a while. We'll stay here for a few minutes. By the way, you can do one leg at a time. Maybe two legs is too much. So one leg's extended, one leg can be bent, then after a while, switch to the other leg here. But if this doesn't work at all, slowly come out of this. For some people, saddle pose works better. Now you have to have a good range of motion to try saddle pose here. So for most of us, this is a more intense and deeper posture. For some people, this actually creates less pain than Milky Way Pose. So if you resemble that remark, you can try full saddle pose. Otherwise, if full saddle pose doesn't work for you either, keep in mind all of these are back bends. So if your intention is to do some sort of lower back bend, something that gets into the lumbar and the sacrum, you can just do Sphinx pose here. The thing about Milky Way is it kind of is more intense on the psoas that runs in front of the pelvic bone here. So that's the only maybe difference that you're going to feel. So choose your variation and then settle. Settle here for a while. So it was quite an extraordinary achievement for these young kids to do original cutting-edge science with only an hour of observation time. And it was all because the professionals missed something. They missed the fact that they simply hadn't observed a brown dwarf at radial light before. That's something they should have done a long time ago. The theorists missed something because they were working off the fact that no brown dwarfs had ever been observed emitting radio light. That's simply because, not because brown dwarfs didn't emit radio light, it's because no one had bothered to try and observe them at radio light. So therein lies the kicker. So science can be a journey that's not so straightforward. Sometimes being human, we simply omit a critical, important piece of the scientific puzzle. The reason why I bring this up is because it is related, again, going back to just trying to feel, observe, and pay attention to our bodies. We might have some theory in our egoic brain of how we think our body moves, how we think our body should feel, and that theory is so well written that we don't even bother to do the observation, to do the experiment, to pay attention and to notice what that part of our body is trying to tell us. And so what we need to do is we need to do the experiment, we need to do the observation, we need to pay attention to that area of our body that's trying to tell us something, and it might contradict the theory in our brains as to what our body really is, really can do, and really feel. This is one of the things that frustrates people that start a yoga practice, is they have all these misconceptions about their own body, how stiff or how not stiff they should be. We move into a yoga posture. The yoga posture tells us, it's like, okay, this is really your range of motion today. And we're frustrated by that because that doesn't fit the theory. Here's the thing though, you have to be a scientist, and a scientist, as soon as they're confronted with real observations that don't match the theory, you have to throw out the theory and start over. And that's exactly what the theorists had to do with the brown dwarfs. A bunch of college students had made the theorists have to start over from scratch and rewrite the theory as to what brown dwarfs really are and could do here. So maybe one more breath here. If you're in Milky Way Pose, bend your knees, put your feet back on the floor. Then press through your feet and your shoulders to lift your hips up so that you can take your hands and remove whatever you're using for props. Maybe it's some books. And then lower yourself back down.
you can gently bring your knees into your torso slowly here and feel the extension of the back of your lumbar vertebrae as you kind of give your knees a squeeze here. And then a little bit of integration before we go into our resting pose here. So maybe we'll end with a twist. Keep your knees bent and in towards your torso, and then slowly lower your knees over to the right. Arms can come out in cactus or T position. It's okay with your neck. You can turn and look over to your left hand here, just for a couple of breaths. Then gently bring everything back up to center. And then very slowly lower your knees over to the left. Gaze can go right, if that's okay with your neck here. And then soften here for maybe one more breath. Knees come back to center. Maybe give your knees a final hug. This is a good opportunity to do any other kind of postures or movements. This is a little bit of free form yoga before coming into our final resting position. So you can take a traditional Shavasana resting pose by just lying on your back. I'm going to suggest seated meditation for this practice, which means you come back to a nice comfortable seat, sort of ending practice the way you began it. And in fact, the next option is you can either just sit here in stillness and just kind of tune into the reverberation of your practice, or you can add some gentle motion and have a Shavasana or ending experience that's not completely still, but has a little bit of motion if that motion creates more calm, more relaxation. So I'm going to suggest the little flow that I started practice with, this third eye flow. So hands cover each other over the heart to begin with. And then at some point they move away and up, and the fingers touch the third eye, the space in between your eyes. And then they slowly move up and then out and away and then back around towards the heart center. And then maybe you want to try this motion as an alternative to stillness. And maybe it's more calming. Maybe it's more relaxing than stillness. If you find stillness to be more relaxing, then you don't have to do this. If you find this more relaxing, maybe try this. In other words, find that activity that allows you to completely release and let go for these final few moments of practice. To notice, to pay attention, and to discover something that has been left undiscovered in your own internal landscape, your own yoga self here. some point, bring yourself back. You can slowly begin to deepen your breath. Make little movements with fingers and with toes. If you have chosen to lie on your back for Shavasana or some other kind of restorative posture, slowly begin to bend your knees and roll over onto one side. When you get there, take your time, stay there and settle. Good time to offer some deep gratitude for the efforts of your practice, but also some deep gratitude for you, your unique manifestation in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then you're ready, bring yourself back to a comfortable seat, or maybe you're already there. When you get settled there, bring your hands together in front of heart center. So I'll end practice with an Om. You can either join in or simply listen. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.